Hello, welcome. I'm never really sure exactly when this goes live. But welcome everybody to this live Q&A. Really looking forward to connecting with you today. I think a lot of us are feeling kind of disconnected. There's been a lot going on, as I have continued to say for the past year. And the longer it drags on, the more we settled in, we feel about it often, or in some ways, but in other ways, it feels just kind of never ending. And that can be hard. So happy to have you here. Happy to have you in this space and looking forward to sharing this space with you. So welcome. I'd love to know who's here if you'd like to say hello. So whether you've got questions or not, I'm glad you're here, but I hope that you do have some questions. Again, you can ask whatever you'd like to ask that I might have an answer to. So anything certainly emotional, healing related, trauma related, but also just kind of more general things about well-being. I'm also happy to answer if I can. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Hello, hello. So if you've got your questions, you can go ahead and start putting them in there. There isn't a particular topic that you need to ask about, anything at all. You are welcome to ask. But before we kind of dive into what we might be talking about today, let's just take a moment to settle in together. Really thinking of this time that you're here with all of us as time to take care of you, time to set aside just to honor yourself and what you need. And whether that today feels like you need just to know you're not alone, whether you have specific questions that you want answered, whether you just need a break from whatever is happening outside of wherever you're at right now, just let yourself honor that and really think of this as an opportunity to really take care of yourself, consciously, intentionally thinking about this as, okay, I'm going to take this time to recharge, to connect. I deserve this. Take this time for you. So, with your eyes open or closed, whatever feels most comfortable to you, just breathing in and breathing out naturally. Don't force your breath at all. Just make sure that you are breathing, making sure that you're inhaling and exhaling, taking a few rounds of breath, really kind of acknowledging what this means for you right now. Again, whether it's just time away from all the external pressure, time to connect, time to feel heard or witnessed, intentional about taking this time for you. Feeling the surface below you, whether you're sitting or lying, knowing that you are supported, allowing your body to relax with each exhalation. Feeling the energy of those of us on this live video right now. And if you're watching this on replay, noticing the people that are here, how many people are here, knowing that you're not alone, even if you're watching this in the middle of the night somewhere, you're not alone. And just continuing to relax into the space that you're in, letting your muscles release a bit more with each exhalation. With Valentine's Day on Sunday, it made me think about self-care. It's one of the things on Valentine's Day I often encourage people to do. Most people who are going to be watching this tend to put up quite a bit of energy into supporting or taking care of other people. And so on Valentine's Day, I often encourage people to make sure that they set time aside and energy aside to take care of themselves in some way. And it made me think about the ability to receive. It's not easy for most people. And for people that it is easy for, it's not usually a healthy thing either. Receiving can be a healthy thing, but people who can receive very easily, it's often because that's what they're used to doing, receiving, and not necessarily having some balance in giving and receiving. But for most people watching this, allowing yourself to receive can be a bit of a challenge. And as I thought about that, I really just thought about how pervasive that is. It's been a huge challenge in my own life, and I've talked about that in a couple of different ways publicly before. But it still is something that doesn't come naturally, generally speaking. In my relationship with my husband, it definitely is much more natural because I've had a lot of practice with it. But it's not an easy thing to do. And so I would like to really encourage you to think about that. Even reflecting backwards, it doesn't have to be about going forward. It can be about allowing yourself to receive something that you experienced recently, a moment of kindness, somebody that you know, or a complete stranger. Receiving somebody's time or attention, receiving love. If somebody held a door open for you, if somebody smiled at you, laughed at one of your jokes, allowing yourself to really just take in that moment, letting yourself feel it at a heart level. You are as deserving of kindness, support, and attention as anybody else. So try to be mindful of that, letting yourself take in those moments. So there's some questions here, so I'm going to get started. So feel free to continue to leave your questions. If you are aware that I have missed your question, feel free to let me know that, and I can scroll back up. I try to make sure I scroll back and forth to make sure I don't miss anything. But if I've missed your question, feel free to leave it again. So hello, everybody. Do I have any experience with clients using, I'm not sure if I know what that is. Yeah, I actually don't know what that is. I don't think. Yeah, I'm not sure what that is, so I don't really have an opinion. Sorry. But I'm curious now for sure. Why is it that negative emotions seem to have much more intensity than positive ones? In part because you believe them. They're familiar. And they tend to bring up fear and or shame. And fear and or shame are the most intense emotional experiences that we really have. So when anything is connected to one of those things, it does feel really intense. And you believe it, you trust it. The positive emotions, you don't fully allow yourself to grab a hold of because you're afraid of losing it. You're afraid of the bad thing that's going to happen afterwards. As time goes on with healing, that shifts a little bit, But the intensity that you feel with like negative emotions isn't the emotion itself or solely about the emotion. Part of the intensity is because of the beliefs that it triggers, those ideas that you hold about who you are. And when you combine that with the feeling, the belief and the feeling, it creates a lot of intensity. It does change a little bit as time goes on, but it is definitely a practice. Can you speak to why our core beliefs are so difficult to heal? Kind of similar to what I was just talking about, but with core beliefs in particular, core beliefs are developed, they begin to be developed even pre-verbally, but certainly before we have the ability to really have language. So core beliefs are also generally unconscious. We can become conscious of them, but as they are being developed, as they are taking hold, we're not conscious that they are our core beliefs. And any thing that drives us that is not conscious has much more power because it reacts kind of instinctively. It has much more power than anything that is conscious. So, at least kind of in the healing process. So, core beliefs are really difficult to heal because we tend to not be aware of them. When we become aware of what the core beliefs are, they are so ingrained that we are still driven in our thoughts, our behaviors, our feelings by those core beliefs. And every time we think, feel, or behave based on a core belief, it reinforces that core belief. So it drives everything. If you think of like a habit, like just a habit that you might pick up, it's really hard to break that habit, right? Some people say it's 21 days, some people say it's 30 days, some people say it's 90 days, but it's really hard to break a habit because you're so used to doing it. It's so automatic. You just do it, whatever that habit is. In order to break that habit, you have to very consciously, intentionally do something different instead of doing that thing. That's not easy to do. A core belief is even more difficult because it is so ingrained and it is developed at such an early age. And so it's developed at an early age, and then pretty much every day of our lives, it is reinforced over and over again. So it's kind of like having a really serious wound and it's trying to heal, but every day you're messing with it and pulling off the scab. When it starts to scab up, you pull that scab off. It's going to take a really long time to heal, right? So every day there's potential for us to experience something that we can take as proof, even though it may not be proof at all. In fact, it's rarely ever proof. But there's something in our day that we can look at, point to, grab a hold of, that we see as proof of what that core belief is. Things that don't fit with our core belief, we sometimes don't even recognize, or if we do notice it, we dismiss it. We say something along the lines of, oh, they didn't really mean that, they were just being nice. Or, oh, that's really not that big of an accomplishment, I didn't have to do anything really. So anything that contradicts that core belief, particularly when we're not conscious, when we're not actively working to replace that core belief, then anything that disproves it just goes right on by. We don't grab a hold of it at all if we even notice it. So That's ultimately why it's so incredibly difficult to change those core beliefs. It takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of practice over time. And we have to do a big part of that is reality testing. So whenever we have something that proves that core belief, that false belief, we have to work to be really mindful in that moment and do some reality testing around that so that we can recognize that just because we believe that it's true, just because it feels very true, doesn't mean that it is. Um, Isabel is just responding to Via. Thank you, Isabel. So you know what that medication is. Good, because I've not heard of it. So Via, if you didn't see this, it did definitely help with nightmares, but can be a problem with low blood pressure. So there you go. I need to understand a little bit more about that. So how does a person overcome learned silence? Grew up getting in trouble for talking about things going on at home or even how I was feeling. I can't talk in therapy to save my life. There's actually maybe a handful of factors that play into this. So part of it can be very directly told, you don't talk about this stuff. But there are a lot of other factors that play into it too. And so obviously they all kind of come together to create fear, uncertainty, shame, and a belief that you can't talk about it. You can't talk about it because it's not the right thing to do. You can't talk about it because you'll be judged. You can't talk about it because something bad will happen. So there are a lot of things that play into that. So how does a person overcome it? Well, particularly in a therapeutic setting, how you overcome it is practicing talking. Practicing maybe with something that seems not quite as significant as some of the bigger things. Practicing sharing. Maybe if verbalizing something doesn't seem to work okay for you, and that can be a challenge for a lot of people, maybe writing things or sending an email to your therapist so that you don't have to worry about verbalizing, especially when you're in there and feeling vulnerable. But being able to share things that you can then talk about in session. But you overcome it by practicing speaking in smaller ways in the beginning, sharing pieces that don't feel as vulnerable or as shameful maybe. And when you do that and it's met with safety, understanding, support, you realize that you're not judged, you realize that nothing bad actually happens as a result of that, you get to learn that it is okay to speak. It is okay to share. It is okay to be vulnerable. And each time that you do that, you feel a little bit safer in that. You feel a little freer in being able to do that. It is important, though, that as you practice that it is with somebody who you have some level of trust that will witness that will support you, that will not judge. Because if you just kind of randomly put stuff out there with somebody who maybe has judged you in the past, it's likely not going to end well for you. But if you're able to do it, again, in a therapeutic setting, then you practice little by little. I think in a therapeutic setting, it's also important to be able to talk about the fear of talking about certain things or everything, if that is a fear. Being able to acknowledge that fear is there is an important part of the process because you're allowing support for that challenge, that fear that is there. But Unfortunately, it is the way to change that is to practice it in little pieces here and there. And it does get easier as time goes on. Um, about to drive. I'm glad you're not participating too much here. Love the journal prompt in Deeply Rooted book about the reminder regarding our body. Survivor mindset, one forgets connection. Yes, the idea of really honoring and connecting to our bodies. Um, that quote that I share in there is every time that I read it or I see it somewhere, and I've shared it in lots of different places, every time I come across that quote, it causes me to pause. Um, because it feels just so powerful. And for those of you who may not know what the quote is, um, I I don't remember exactly what the quote is, but it is a powerful quote. Like it can actually be a bit triggering to read because it does connect you to your body. Sorry, I'm just seeing if I can find that quote real quick because I actually like to maybe share it because it is such a powerful quote. So the quote here from Lou, um, in regards to helping you remember to connect to your body. I don't know how to pronounce this person's name, so I hope I don't mess it up too bad. Nayera Wahid is the person who wrote this. She's a poet, I believe. And I said to my body softly, I want to be your friend. It took a long breath and replied, I have been waiting my whole life for this. That, like really, every time that I see that or I read it, it really causes me to just really feel into that. It's a powerful, powerful quote and a powerful practice in the journal prompt as well. Okay, it's an old-fashioned hypertension medication. Got it. Oh, is that also, I'm wondering, you don't have to answer this, but I know that there are some medications given to people who really struggle with anxiety, like with public speaking as well. I know that that's something that is used. I don't know name brands or anything though, or even the names necessarily. Deeply profound and a touching quote. Yes, I think so too. So, any other questions? I think that I've answered everything that's here so far. Um, I've had choking phobia for many years. 3 years ago, it became extreme. It's better after therapy, but still struggle to eat and drink every day. Will this phobia ever leave me? Michelle, first of all, I want you to know that you're not alone. And whether it's related specifically to anything or not, this is something that actually I wouldn't say is necessarily common, but it's certainly not completely unusual either. And I will say that for people that have experienced abuse as children, it can be even more significant at times. So you're definitely not alone. Will it ever leave you? So okay, sorry. Will it ever leave you? Just kind of naturally leave you? My guess is probably not. However, I do think that it is very possible that if you are able to do some things that are very kind of specific around this phobia, that you may be able to move through it to where it's not an issue for you any longer. Um, and there's different pieces to that, and part of it is certainly understanding the phobia, even if there's nothing specifically you can pinpoint a direct correlation to. Just being able to have a really good understanding of what the phobia really is about, maybe how it originated, but also what it means for you right now. Uh, so being able to understand that, I think, is important. And then doing some practicing to where you practice with eating and drinking very intentionally in a place emotionally and maybe literally where you feel safe, where you feel some sense of kind of freedom, some ease, practicing kind of getting your body, in particular, obviously your throat, into a place of practicing when it feels safe to do so. Uh, there's some other kinds of things like being mindful and reminding yourself of it being safe or whatever you need to be able to remind yourself of in those moments when you're doing it. There are potentially some throat opening kinds of things that you could practice as well, like some throat chakra stuff. There's lion's breath. There is being able to use your voice and maybe sing. So different things to kind of basically help open up this part of your body. Even if you aren't necessarily somebody who's into energy or chakra healing, some of the exercises in particular that you can find on throat chakra healing might actually be beneficial to you as well. So yes, I do think that it's something that you can work through, but it's not something that's just going to kind of naturally happen. Thank you, Isabel. So does shame feel so intense and almost physical because it is familiar? In part, yes. Absolutely, it is familiar, but it also feels really intense because it gets at one of the deepest, most damaging core beliefs, which is not being enough or not being worthy. And those two things really go together. People just might use different words for them. So it really touches on that core belief. And when shame is triggered, it creates a sense of not only not being worthy or not being enough, but that there's danger in being seen. It feels incredibly vulnerable. And so in that vulnerability, because it's like somebody seeing that you're unworthy, somebody seeing that you have something to be ashamed of. And so in that vulnerable place, when that kicks in, that intensity is about not wanting to be seen. It's about not wanting to feel unworthy. And so that energy is about removing yourself. And one thing that comes up for a lot of people is when there's an intense shame reaction is one of two things: a desire to run or hide, and it could be literally running, or it could be like, I need to get out of here, I need to get off the phone, I need to hang up, I need to whatever. So the desire to run, get away, or hide, or it can immediately take you to a place of wanting to take your life. And in reality, both of those things, they're obviously very different, but both of those things are extreme ways of not having to face whatever it is you're facing right there in that moment. So that shame, that intensity of shame, is because of the level of vulnerability that is present when you feel that shame. And we don't want to feel that, right? Our survival mechanism is not wanting to connect to that sense of unworthiness, of shame, of not being enough, not wanting to be seen as not enough or unworthy. So that intensity comes up to protect you. from feeling that. And what is paradoxical about that is that it obviously doesn't work. In fact, either one of those things can reinforce that shame. It reinforces that you're not worthy of being seen, which is part of the reason why when we're talking about healing, we need to be able to understand, what shame do I hold on to? What are the triggers that bring up shame for me? What do I say to myself to hold on to shame? What does this shame reinforce about who I believe I am or am not? And the other thing about shame is that there might be some very specific things that we feel shame around. Like we might be able to say, oh, I feel ashamed of this, or I feel ashamed of that. But the thing about shame is that the shame itself doesn't differentiate. When you feel shame about something, even if you're not conscious of it, maybe especially when you're not conscious of it, when you feel shame about something, anything that can make you believe, that connects to that belief of not being enough or not being worthy, being bad, undeserving, whatever it is, anything that happens in your life, in your day-to-day life, even if it's an interpretation, taking something personally, if that connects with a belief that's attached to shame, in that moment, you feel shame. So all that intensity of shame can come up in that moment, and it can feel completely out of proportion to what is going on. But it's because anytime that shame is triggered, it's not triggered for this one thing over here. Shame is this blob of destruction that we hold on to, that anytime one of those core beliefs is triggered, that we're reminded of it, the shame is touched on and it becomes huge. So literally anything at all that makes us question our sense of self can bring up shame. And depending on how vulnerable we're feeling, it can be as intense as if there's a situation that feels really, really difficult. And that's part of the difficulty with shame, is that it is hard to identify because our survival mechanism doesn't want to acknowledge. In a sense, almost feels like it can't acknowledge the shame, because then you would believe more in your unworthiness. I know it may not seem like you could believe any more in it, but when you feel that shame, it takes you to the depths of despair in a way. And I know that might sound kind of dramatic, but it really is. It's like immediately, if you think about like a free diver and they carry the weight, they have the weight to take them down. It's as soon as that shame is triggered, as soon as that belief is triggered, immediately you're taken to the depths of that shame. And then you're, of course, reminded of all the other things that make you feel ashamed as well. So shame is an incredibly intense, incredibly destructive, not only emotion, but experience that we have. And I will say that I've never worked with anybody who has shared something that they feel ashamed of that is something for them to feel ashamed of. The shame is not ours, yet we hold on to it as if our life depends on it. And of course, that's not a conscious decision, but we hold on to it because it creates so much vulnerability that it's hard to be able to heal it. So I know I went on there for a while, but I hope that helps. Interesting that you spoke about being seen. Can you speak a little about the trauma of feeling not seen or feeling invisible, almost literally as a child? Yes. So the trauma of feeling invisible, not being seen, as kind of an ongoing pattern, because for that belief to happen, for that belief to be there, it is generally going to be a repetitive kind of experience that you internalize. What it does is it gives you the sense, it makes you believe ultimately, but in the moment, it gives you the sense that you don't matter. As children, from infants up until, well, truly actually into our adult lives, we need to know that we matter to the people that we care about, but in kind of an esoteric way, kind of just generally, that we matter in the human experiment. As children, whether as an infant, a toddler, or even up to the age of around 7 or so, if our experience is that we are ignored or dismissed, our needs are not met, emotional needs, physical needs too, of course, but if our emotional needs are not met, there's no way that you can come through that and not have a felt sense, a lived experience. There's no way you can come through that without a sense of not feeling important, not feeling that you matter, not believing ultimately that you matter. And so as you go through life, going back to the idea of core beliefs, as you go through life, you're going to take experiences with your family of origin, but with everybody else too, potentially even a stranger, depending on how vulnerable you're feeling. You're going to take experiences and personalize them as proof that you don't matter. So a friend doesn't call you back, or a stranger walks through the door of the store and doesn't hold it open for you. So many different examples that I could give here, but you're going to take that as proof that you don't matter, that nobody really sees you. And if nobody sees you, it's because you don't matter. It's because they don't care. It's because you're not worthy of being seen. And so as we go through our life, then one of the beliefs that we hold on to is not being worthy, not being enough. And again, kind of ultimately the same belief, but how it comes up, how it shows up, maybe a little bit different. So we can feel incredibly isolated. We can fear putting ourselves out there for fear of rejection, because if you were not seen or witnessed as a young child, even if you were being bad, if you were being bad and you weren't really witnessed, or you were only witnessed when you were being bad, if you were good and you were still not witnessed, or if that was the only time you were witnessed, that's going to leave a wound. It's going to leave you with a belief that only under certain conditions or under no conditions are you worthy of being seen. And so part of how you change that belief, and this is a part of it, it's multi-layered, but part of how you change that belief is risking vulnerability and allowing yourself to be seen. Consciously doing that very intentionally, and recognizing how you can be seen and how you can be supported. But a lot of that really is the healing work. Much of the healing work of that is being able to really undo that belief of being unworthy, so that you can connect to the truth of your worthiness. I hope that makes sense. I have no problem being angry with myself. Why can I not be angry with the abuser? Well, Sarah, part of the reason that you can be so angry at yourself is because you've taken on all that responsibility. Even if you're referring to being angry at yourself for all kinds of other reasons, but you've taken on that responsibility. You have made yourself believe that you're wrong, that you're bad, you can't do anything right, that you're weak, whatever it may be. You've taken that on. And so it's easy to be angry at yourself if you believe those things about yourself. If you think you screw everything up, that you can never finish anything, it's easy to be angry at yourself because you believe those things. Being angry at your abuser requires a level of putting the responsibility and ultimately the shame where it belongs. It's putting responsibility for the abuse on the abuser. And that is incredibly challenging. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Particularly if the abuser is somebody that you had a relationship with in some way. So if you were to allow yourself to feel angry at the abuser, you would be putting responsibility, or at least some responsibility, on the abuser. And that goes against what you believe. It also feels scary because it can bring up fear around what that actually means for your life, for your memories, for relationships going forward. And it can also bring up a lot of grief when you put that responsibility where it belongs. So that's kind of ultimately what it is. And so I think there's two pieces to that in terms of healing. And one is being able to not judge yourself and not be angry at yourself, not hate yourself. Maybe there's some self-forgiveness that might be necessary, but without any doubt whatsoever, self-compassion is necessary. So a good practice of self-compassion is important in being able to change that, and working on some of the healing pieces that need to happen in order to put the responsibility where it belongs. And being angry in part of that with an abuser is perfectly okay, perfectly natural, and can be actually quite healthy. But I also just want to say that when you are working on the healing process and you're able to put responsibility where it belongs, it isn't actually completely necessary that you have to feel a lot of anger towards your abuser in order to be able to heal. So again, I'm not saying that you shouldn't feel angry, because it's perfectly okay to feel angry. And if that's part of what comes up for you, then that's perfectly fine, and actually might be something that you need to be able to experience. But I also don't want people to get hung up on the idea that you have to feel anger towards your perpetrator in order to be able to heal. You don't. You just have to be able to completely put the responsibility and the shame on that perpetrator. Because if you're still holding any of that, you won't be able to fully heal. So that part is necessary. Putting the responsibility where it belongs is necessary, but being really angry isn't. Not being angry at yourself, letting go of all the responsibility that you hold on to, is necessary, though. How can we change our anger? Stop it being displaced. I find when I'm very vulnerable and emotions or feelings are visible, if someone is kind, I want to hurt them, especially strangers. So I suspect, given the whole comment here, Allison, or question, I suspect that in those moments, shame is triggered. A sudden or intense kind of anger is often a result of shame being triggered, because anger is almost always secondary to hurt or fear. And shame is connected to both of those things. And anytime that we have a really strong reaction to something, going back to the question about shame, I think it was Isabel's question about shame. Shame is the most destructive and intense kind of thing that we experience. Even if we're kind of denying that it's there, it can still show up. And maybe it affects us in how we feel physically, gives us a headache, gives us muscle tension. So I suspect that in those moments there's shame. And so when you say when I'm feeling vulnerable and emotions or feelings are visible, so in those moments, in that vulnerability, there might be fear of what people are thinking. There may be fear of being taken advantage of. There may be shame that is present because you believe that it's weak, that feeling vulnerable is weak, that having emotions is weak, and all of that can be tied to shame. But that anger is often, as you say here, it's displaced. It is a way to not feel what's happening inside. So when that anger comes up, and for some people it can be anger that's displaced, it could be feeling suicidal, it could be a strong desire to withdraw and completely isolate, and often the suicidality can go along with that. But when that immediate kind of reaction, intense reaction happens, it's because you're protecting that vulnerable part of yourself. So part of how you change it then is, I know I keep coming back to this, but I wrote a book on it because it is such a big thing. Part of how you change it is practicing self-compassion, being able to be a witness to your own vulnerability, being able to be present with that from a place of caring and kindness, from a place of self-compassion, to honor that vulnerability, to not view it as weakness, to acknowledge that it's okay to feel afraid, instead of beating yourself up and saying something along the lines of, you shouldn't feel that way, or telling yourself that you're weak because you're vulnerable, or expressing emotions. One of the things about vulnerability and expressing emotions is it can also bring up familiar feelings of feeling very alone. And feeling alone, feeling lonely, can often also be connected to shame. So if that feels like it could be part of what's happening, this isn't easy, but trying to make an intentional effort to make sure that you are connected. Allow yourself to be vulnerable. Allow yourself to be seen without a mask, with somebody who you feel at least relatively supported by. Doesn't mean that you have to talk about everything that's going on. I mean, in an ideal world, maybe you'd be able to, but it's not even having to talk about the stuff that's going on, the stuff that's really bothering you. It's about allowing yourself just to be seen and witnessed in a place of struggle. And you don't necessarily have to go into all the details, but that anger really is an avoidance of wanting to feel the shame, of wanting to feel that vulnerability. You try to avoid that at all costs, because feeling vulnerable, so I talked about shame being kind of the most destructive thing, and I believe that it is, but those moments of vulnerability are when the survival mechanism is at its strongest. because your survival mechanism developed at a very early age so that you wouldn't have to face, for people who are child abuse survivors, so that you wouldn't have to face impossible circumstances, so that you could get up every day and go on. Your survival experience was telling you, making you believe that it was your fault, so that you could believe that you had some control over it, and that the worst thing that you could do was be vulnerable. And so anytime that vulnerability becomes present, even if you're not conscious of it, or again, especially if you're not conscious of it, but when that vulnerability is there, and almost anything can make us vulnerable, and it layers on top of itself. Anything that makes you feel vulnerable, especially if you've already been vulnerable, is going to bring up that self-protective piece. And again, the anger is a projection of, this is how I stay safe. I keep people at a distance. I don't want to like people. I don't want people to like me. I don't want to talk to them because then I'll feel vulnerable and I might get emotional. I don't want to talk to them because then they might see that vulnerability and think differently of me. So practicing self-compassion so that you can recognize that you are worthy, that you are enough, that you are loved and supported with all the imperfections that each of us has, can help you lean into that a little bit more. When I'm being vulnerable, like sharing my opinion on something in a public setting, I can get a pain along with the other feelings, which makes it harder to share. Being vulnerable and sharing an opinion can feel incredibly vulnerable, especially if it's not an opinion that necessarily is kind of the overriding opinion. Because when you share an opinion, it can feel very personal. If you have a thought about something and somebody doesn't agree with it, it can feel that they're in disagreement with us. And if they're in disagreement with us, then there must be something wrong with me. If they're in disagreement with my opinion, then they're in disagreement with me. If they're in disagreement with me, then I'm not enough. Then my opinion doesn't matter. My experience doesn't matter. So it can really, it's amazing how we can go through so many layers in a matter of a split second. But sharing an opinion is definitely not an easy thing to do. Even if it does kind of go along with other people, it's still voicing your internal world a little bit. And that's a very vulnerable thing to do. The more I practice self-compassion, the more I am able to feel compassion for others. And the more likely I am to stand up for myself when boundaries are being crossed. Absolutely. Yes, Kate. Yeah. What you say here about the more I practice self-compassion, the more I am able to feel compassion for others. This is a really interesting thing. And I believe that this is true. What a lot of people would say is, well, I can feel a lot of compassion for other people, but I can't feel it for myself. And I think that that is true. But I think that also when we are shutting ourselves off from acceptance, when we are shutting ourselves off from compassion, from self-love, from our own sense of kind of freedom in the world, that we're enough as we are, then our interactions, our relationships with others, it's not that we're lying, it's not that we're being dishonest, but we can only really be connected to others to the capacity that we are connected to ourselves in a genuine and authentic way. Now, that doesn't mean we can't love people. It doesn't mean we can't be compassionate or support people, but there's always a bit of an apprehension. There's a little bit of an uncertainty, a fear maybe of being judged, taking things personally at times. Because if you don't have that sense of worth and confidence and acceptance within yourself, then you're not ever really going to be able to feel fully safe. In other words, you will feel vulnerable in relationships. And so the compassion can be there, but it's not coming from as much of an open and free place. So I just want to say, so for anybody who's hearing that and saying, wait a minute, that's not true. I am compassionate and I love and care about other people. I'm not saying that you don't. And that's not at all what I'm suggesting. And I'm not suggesting that you're dishonest or anything like that. It's not even a conscious thing. But when we don't fully accept ourselves, we fear what other people might think of us. And so, yes, we can be compassionate with that other person, but the freedom, the openness is not as free-flowing in that kind of situation. And yes, the more self-compassion you have for yourself, the more you believe in yourself, the more you trust yourself, the more you accept yourself. And when you trust in yourself and believe in yourself, setting boundaries is much easier in so many ways. So yes, I'm glad that you kind of made that connection there. And it is a very significant one. I did try connecting with a friend after what happened. Then she told me to pick myself up and dust myself off. That experience was over. It's also frustrating. So I'm sorry that happened, Allison. And this is, unfortunately, this is an all too common type of experience. And in the last Q&A, somebody brought up the idea of like somebody suggesting that you're playing a victim or something like that. And it's kind of similar, kind of a similar idea here. This is hard and it can feel hurtful. And of course, it's kind of impossible to not take it personally. And when you're already feeling vulnerable, of course, it's how, what you take from that is you're right. I do need to just pick myself up and dust myself off. And dust myself off. And what's wrong with me? Why can't I do that? God, I'm such an idiot. I'm so weak. But the reality is that a statement like that, generally, a statement like that comes from a place of ignorance. And I don't mean that in a judgmental way. I mean that purely from the fact that a lack of understanding. There are people who truly believe that you don't talk about difficult things because why dwell on that? They're wrong. But there are people who believe that because that's what they've been taught. And we learn that in a lot of different ways in our upbringing and in our sometimes daily lives. But that is not the reality. And it's why so many people struggle, because we have been taught to just pick yourself up and dust yourself off. But of course, that creates more shame. So it's not helpful at all. But being able to recognize that people say those kinds of things because they are generally ignorant about the reality of what they're saying actually means, that it isn't helpful, that it creates more damage, or they are saying it because that's how they cope. They cope by not talking about things, by staying in denial. I can't tell you how many people I have known who have experienced, for example, some aspect of sexual abuse or assault. who will actually tell another survivor, oh, just that was in the past. Don't think about it anymore. Don't give them your power. Or something along those lines. I've heard people say that many times. Obviously, that's not helpful. There are people who believe that, but people often believe that because it's an easier route than facing the truth. I say this all the time. It takes far more courage and strength to face the truth than it does to stay in denial. Because denial is your natural way of coping. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to do anything to be in denial. It's kind of automatic. Making a conscious choice to be vulnerable. There is nothing more courageous, nothing that takes more strength. Nothing. Again, I go back to it's courageous journeys for a reason. There's nothing more courageous. And the other thing I would say about that is there are people who can be friends in your life who just don't have the capacity to move beyond their denial. And those friends can be friends in certain ways. But it's important to recognize that, okay, this friend can be great in this way, but this is not the friend that I go to when I'm struggling. This is not the friend that has the capacity to witness. This is not the friend that has the capacity to go deep into her own soul, her own pain, because that is the reality. And that's not a judgment about that person. The truth is, most people are in denial about their pain, right? You can't heal what you deny is wounded. I say that because after years of talking to people, realizing just how many people are in denial, and I was one of those people, without a doubt. That's how we cope. That's how we survive. Barbara, okay. Can you speak to the difficulty one has in feeling safe, and why is trust an aspect of not feeling safe and so difficult to heal? Okay. So, Barbara, I'm assuming, I'm kind of making an assumption here that this is more about emotional safety than physical safety. So I'm going to go with that. If it's not, then please let me know. And thank you for the letting me know that there was a question above. Okay, so can you speak to the difficulty one has in feeling safe, and why is trust an aspect of not feeling safe? So for anybody who has been hurt by another person, especially at a young age, and that hurt can look a lot of different ways, but especially when it's been an ongoing kind of situation, you have learned, not necessarily consciously, it's not something that you sit and contemplate, but you learn at a very early age, you learn at a very deep level that people that you should be able to feel safe with, and as a child, even a stranger is somebody who you could suspect that you might feel safe with, because hopefully, for most children, there's no reason to fear a stranger that knocks on your door or whatever, who's invited into your home. But when you learn that somebody that you should be able to trust hurts you, the truth is that you never really feel safe again. Now, it doesn't mean that you sit around and consciously think that you're not safe, but in your body, in your mind even, again, not consciously though, you don't really feel safe. And so there becomes an expectation then that you can easily be hurt. There may even become an expectation that people will hurt you, especially if you're vulnerable. So vulnerability plays a huge part in a lot of this, in a lot of our struggle. So if you don't feel safe, then naturally you're not going to trust somebody. And again, this isn't necessarily conscious. So when you're building relationships with people, whether it's a coworker or a friend or a partner, when you're building relationships with people, there's a part of you, and often this is a subconscious part, there's a part of you that is going to feel vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, because again, when you feel that vulnerability, then those fears come up. So naturally, you're going to feel some uncertainty about feeling safe to be vulnerable, feeling safe to show up without the mask, safe in kind of waiting for that person to hurt you because that's the expectation. So the more not conscious that is, the more impact it has, the more it drives everything that you think, feel, and react to. So part of the reason that it's difficult to heal is that in order to heal it, you have to be able to feel that vulnerability. You have to make a choice to feel that vulnerability. When you feel that vulnerability, you're more likely to feel hurt. You're more likely to feel not seen, because you, in that vulnerability, you can take something, again, somebody not calling you back. You can take that personally because you're feeling vulnerable. And when you take it personally, you might say something to yourself of either blaming yourself and beating yourself up. Oh, I know I shouldn't have called, or I knew I shouldn't have sent a message. Or you might, depending on how much shame is there or how much vulnerability is there, you might get really angry at that person for not calling you back. Why is that person calling me back? I knew I should have never trusted that person. So again, it's two different ways of responding to the same feeling. And there are different reasons why people respond differently. But in order for that trust to heal, in order to feel safe in being able to trust people, you have to risk being vulnerable. And then in that vulnerability, be very mindful of not taking things personally, of doing some reality testing, of reminding yourself of, maybe it's a person that never calls you back. And so maybe you recognize, okay, in all reality, this person rarely calls me back, but I keep thinking that they're going to. Maybe I need to set my own personal boundary around, okay, this is not a person I'm going to call when I want to talk or when I'm struggling, when I want connection. But if in fact that person usually does call you back, then you can say to yourself, okay, I'm feeling really hurt, but I know that I'm taking it personally and that's why I'm feeling hurt. But the truth is, this person does usually call me back. The truth is, it taking this person 2 hours or till the next day to call me back doesn't mean that they're thinking something bad about me. It doesn't mean that I've done something wrong. And so being really mindful of being able to talk yourself through that, because when you're able to talk yourself through that, then that hurt that might be there, that sense of feeling unsafe begins to dissipate. Because instead of holding on to the idea that this person hurt you, this person is wrong, this person did something to you, this person doesn't care, which is going to be the initial kind of thought, you're able to, in recognizing what is real and true, you're able to negate or kind of mitigate some of that feeling, some of that shame even that might be there, because you're connecting to what is true. Recognizing that feeling hurt doesn't have to mean that that person hurt you. Now, if it is somebody who never returns your call, then in that situation, again, not only is it something that you want to set a boundary around, but in that situation, acknowledging the reality, okay, this person really doesn't call me back. Maybe this isn't somebody who I could consider an actual friend. Does this person respect me? Are there other examples of how this person respects me? And in truth, a lot of us do have relationships that aren't particularly healthy. Because if we don't believe that we deserve healthy relationships, we often choose friendships and partnerships that are not necessarily all that healthy in the beginning stages of our healing. So it's a matter of putting yourself out there, of working through the personalization of it. It's kind of being able to connect with what's happening in that whole picture at the time. And then you continue to build on that over time. So recognizing that there's been some healing, but I think I'll keep working on it. I'm still feeling a lot of shame and anger. If there is a lot of shame and anger, then there's definitely more healing you can do. And you deserve to have that healing so that you can release that shame. Because the shame is not yours. It never has been. Never. So lots of healing there to do. Okay, so speaking for myself, I have loved and appreciated people and felt compassion for others, but when I couldn't feel compassion for myself, I had layers of judgment that I'd project onto others. And that's an example kind of how there isn't like an openness or a freedom that can be there, because there's these difficult feelings that kind of go along with it. But that's a great example. Yes, absolutely. When I have flashbacks, I tend to hold my breath. I have tried the 5 senses exercise. It works sometimes, but I have also noticed if I try to take deep breaths, it makes it worse. Is there any right way around that? So this is something a lot of people struggle with. Breathing, particularly when you're in a state of kind of hyperarousal, is not beneficial for a lot of people. So engaging the 5 senses is one of the practices that can be helpful. What I would say is, first of all, if you're not doing this, or if you haven't practiced this, practice grounding techniques when you're not feeling overwhelmed or triggered. So when you're feeling kind of neutral or calm, practicing grounding, practicing breathing, practicing engaging your 5 senses, or whatever kind of grounding experience feels beneficial to you. And what works at one time may not work as well another time. So practicing lots of different ones, I think is helpful. So practicing grounding when you're not in a state of hyperarousal is important, because when you're not in a state of hyperarousal, that's when your system can experience that grounded state a lot easier. the more practice and experience your system has in being grounded, the easier it is to reconnect to that when you are in that heightened state. So that's the first thing that I would say, is practicing those grounding techniques, engaging the five senses or whatever other kind of grounding you want to do, practicing it when you're not in that heightened state. When you're having a flashback, it is really hard to do anything different. But one of, I think, probably the most significant thing in those moments that that's probably going to be most helpful, I guess I should say, is if you are aware enough, being able to ground into the place that you are. So grabbing a hold of something. So not necessarily to feel it tactily, but grabbing a hold to feel literally grounded. So like if there's a heavy piece of furniture, or a post, or something that's kind of got some sturdiness to it, grabbing a hold of something, feeling your feet on the floor if at all possible, and kind of engaging, if your feet are on the floor, maybe engaging your leg muscles, in particular your quads. So really reminding yourself that you're safe, where you are in this moment. So grounding into the space that you are at that particular moment. That may or may not be particularly helpful in that moment, but again, the more you practice it, the more beneficial it becomes. So in terms of the breathing, when you are kind of in a heightened state, trying to take a deep breath can mess up your nervous system even a little bit more. So what I would say, when you are in a little bit more of a heightened state, just becoming aware of your breath. So don't try to take a deep breath. Don't force any sort of pattern of breathing, but just become aware of your breath. Just maybe say inhale, exhale, inhale, or just kind of repeating inhale. Casually, not kind of in a forced way. But again, practicing breathing when you're not in a heightened state can be helpful. If it's to the point where like you're not breathing long enough that you're going to pass out, if you have any sense that it's going to happen, then obviously kind of lay down, or so that you're not going to like fall or something like that. But I suspect that practicing when you're not in that particularly heightened state is going to be the thing kind of in a bigger picture that is going to be most helpful to you. I have a friend, a survivor, that did an ayahuasca retreat and came back saying basically that she's been totally healed. What are your thoughts on this? I could do a whole thing on this. Okay, so I'm going to try not to go on. So what I'm about to say is based on professional experience, in addition, and this is an important part, in addition to hearing from people who have done these kinds of things, okay? People who are abuse survivors and people who are not, but talk about trauma or talk about healing and stuff like that. So this is my opinion. I think it's a form of bypassing. I think it's a form of denial. And part of what has led me there is is in the people that I've spoken with, the people that I've read things from even, um, tend to be in kind of the community of like a spiritual seeker, a spiritual leader. Um, and over the last several years, what I have noticed is a whole lot of bypassing, a whole lot of shaming actually for people who talk about being, struggling or talking about their trauma. Um, I'm not saying that that is the case across the board, but that's the majority of what I have kind of witnessed. So with something like this, what what I think happens is it is talked about as being profoundly healing, even healing your ancestors, healing past lives, that it is the thing that you need to do to release all the blocks that are there. But the reality is that when it comes to being a trauma survivor, an abuse survivor, yes, it lives in our body. The body keeps the score, the somatic stuff. Yes, it lives in our body and we need to connect to our body. We need to heal our body. No doubt about that. But part of the reason that it lives in our body is because it lives in our mind. Our daily thoughts, sometimes our minute-to-minute thoughts, reinforce the feeling, the trauma in our bodies. The long-term damage, the self-defeating behaviors, the unworthiness, the limiting beliefs, all of that is because of the meaning that we attach to the abuse that lives in our thoughts, that lives in our mind. We cannot change that by any specific technique. There is a lengthy process. There is a practice you have to do time and time again. Going back to how do you change core beliefs, Barbara's question. Is there something that can happen in that moment where you have this moment of awareness, where you connect to the essence of who you are? Can that happen? Probably. But is that in and of itself completely healing? No, it isn't. And again, my opinion, but I feel like I have done this work enough, long enough. I've done my own work, and I've talked to, I've known people, I've heard from people who have done similar kinds of things, who, yes, feel like they're on cloud nine. They've reached this utopia of seeing kind of who they are, and they've released all these things, and inevitably, whether it's 2 weeks later, 2 months later, or 2 years later, they come crashing down. And crashing may seem dramatic. Of course, not everybody is going to find themselves really, really like struggling like they've never struggled before. But I have actually seen that happen, where they actually end up feeling worse than they did. And the same thing has happened. I've talked about this with EMDR. Again, some people find it beneficial. And I think that it can have a place for certain things. But very often, it doesn't do the entire healing, because you have to be able to undo what you believe about who you are, what you've believed about who you are from a very early age, that you believed on an unconscious level, that has driven everything about how you show up in the world and how you feel about who you are, how you experience your life. There isn't one thing, there isn't one technique, there isn't one experience that can just change all of that. Can it be helpful in some way? Maybe. Yes, probably. But does it completely heal you? No. I believe what I believe about EMDR and stuff like this because of what I have heard from people. Because in listening to them talk about where they were, what happened, how they were after at some point, the high afterwards, immediately afterwards, and then the often low, that's how I formed the opinion that I have. And of course, my understanding of trauma in general. So I know people find it to be kind of an incredible experience, and it probably can be in potentially a variety of ways. But I don't believe that it can be the thing that is going to heal somebody who is going, that where it's going to heal that deep core wounding. I wish that there was something that we could do, a particular technique, something that we could do once or twice that would heal the trauma. I wish there was. But there isn't. There are things that can help with symptoms, things that can help you feel better at different times, but it's short-lived. It's why focusing on like limiting beliefs or affirmations don't actually heal, because it's surface. It doesn't heal that original wounding. It's not just healing that original wound isn't a decision we make. It's a practice, an ongoing practice. So that can bring up, like I said, I could go on and on about that. Jody Isabel here is sharing some thoughts about this. Stimulates the visual cortex in the brain, causing the effects. I have sadly seen patients admitted to hospital with paranoid psychosis and suicidality. I have heard of, not specifically well, actually, I guess maybe they didn't define it as that, but actually probably would be defined as that. It can bring up a lot, I guess. Thank you for sharing that as well. The more healing I do, the more layers I discover. And I've been healing for 30 years or more. Michelle, you're not alone. You're really not alone in that. And there's different reasons for that. Sometimes we're just, where we're at a particular time is maybe where we can go for whatever reason. And that's not a weakness or a bad thing. It also, as we come into different stages of our lives, we can hear things. Like we might hear something, at one point that we heard 10 years earlier, but because of life and how we evolve, when we hear it 10 years later, we hear it in a very different way. Maybe it's how it's said, or maybe it's where we're at and how we're hearing it. But that is a very common thing that can happen. And I often say to people that even when you do a lot of really great healing at a particular point in your life, especially if you're 20s, 30s, or younger, there's a good chance that there's going to be more healing for you to do, because in that stage in your life where you are is different. Like what your focus is, where your energy is a little bit different than where you are at maybe 40, 50, or 60, or 70. So it's quite common that is the case. And for a lot of people, even if they've done a lot of great work, it's possible that maybe, for a number of reasons, that maybe you're the work that hasn't actually touched into those layers. So that can be part of it quite often as well. Well, thanks for joining us, Kate. Glad to have you here. So, lots of great questions today. I always think there are great questions. So hopefully I got to everybody. If I didn't, please leave a comment quickly, because I don't want to miss anything. And I certainly can, as we saw earlier. So I hope you're finding these helpful. So I will be back in March for the Q&A on the first and third Tuesday of the month. And then we'll make a determination where we go from there. So I really appreciate you all asking the questions. And again, if you've got the question, there's no doubt that somebody else has wondered the same thing, whether it's somebody actually here live or somebody watching this on replay. So your questions not only help you, but will also help somebody else down the road as well. So, really, thank you all for being here. I will look forward to seeing you in March. If you haven't signed up, it's not too late for you to sign up for the free virtual workshop I'm doing for Deeply Rooted. So if you're working through Deeply Rooted, or if you're not and you just have it and you want to join the workshop, please sign up. I think that I have a link in the description. I'll check and I'll double check and make sure. If not, I'll add it. It's a free workshop on February 27th at 9:30 a.m. Pacific on Zoom. So you don't have to work through it in order to participate, but there will be a lot of Q&A regarding the prompts or the book in general. And then I'm also going to go through probably a couple pieces as well. So I'd love to connect with you there. Have a beautiful rest of your week, and I will look forward to seeing you in March if I don't see you on the 27th. Bye, everybody. Allison, I may have shoved it to the screen a little, but still grateful. It's okay. It's getting that out. It's allowing yourself to feel what you're feeling. Just be sure to take care of yourself. Be sure to practice some self-compassion, and that can look a lot of different ways. Maybe also, I don't know if you were here at the beginning, but being mindful of that idea of receiving. So thinking about support that you have received, thinking about the people that do, that have been there, that do listen, that you do feel safe in being vulnerable with. Reflect on that and let yourself take that in. Let yourself take in that support, that care, that love. I would encourage all of you to do that, actually. You're all very welcome. Thank you, and I will look forward to seeing you in March. Bye.